Today's lecture was supposed to be on social listening and verification. I'm going to use a presentation from Fergus Bell, who is, I believe, still a current RJI fellow, developing a project called Pop-Up Newsroom, where journalists work together to identify breaking news and verify things from social media. They did it around elections in Mexico, and they're continuing to build it out. So I'm utilizing this. I have a different version, but it requires participation. So I'm going to kind of rely on his because he has the answers kind of already set up in his presentation. But we'll talk a little bit more about how we use this in the Missourian and what you can be doing as a social journalist when you're looking for things on social media. So he kind of goes through, and I'm going to share this whole PDF so you can read each slide on your own, but just going to go through the highlights. So he's talking about digital news gathering and the way that that has opened doors, because it is not just what your newsroom produces, but it is things beyond that. So he's specifically dealing with content that has a digital origin not created by our own staff or network. And so we're thinking about sourcing, communication technology, and publishing standards. He defines user-generated content as content that has news or editorial value that has been produced by non-journalists. So when we think about a workflow for this content, then we have a situation where news breaks, we begin monitoring, or you're monitoring and news breaks. There's a search discovery of what's being talked about on social media. Then there's a verification process. And then it goes through, once it's verified, then it can go through the normal outlets for publishing. And so you can kind of see how this works both for user-generated content, and then like this is a more standard news flow for your own content. But this is dealing with social and user-generated content where you're getting to the point you've got to monitor, find it, and then verify it, and then put it in the story and embed it. So what would you say are the different types of social signals that might alert someone to breaking news? So what would you look for when what would be a clue that there's breaking news? So in general, we would talk about this, but it can be any sort of social post, right? So it could be just a tweet with text. It could be a video either on Instagram or Twitter or going live on Facebook. It could just be a Facebook post. It could be a comment. All different ways that you can get a clue that something happens, that people are starting to record it on their own, on their social media feeds. So what would you say if you were looking for breaking? One thing I want to point out here is that often when I ask the question in class, then the quick answer is you look for what's trending on Twitter. In this scenario, we are trying to find things before they are on Twitter or trending on Twitter. So they may be on Twitter, but they haven't reached trending status. So this is stuff that is happening in the moment. Trending takes a while on Twitter. So you want to catch things before they reach that point. So that's kind of the goal with this. And then I want you to think about what you'd search for if something was happening. Like if there was an explosion on campus, for example, what kinds of words, what kinds of things would the average person be using? And so that's what this slide shows. So if you think about the reaction posts that people have to something happening, these are the types of words that they're using. They're not describing exactly in journalism language or in official language what happened. They are responding in the moment to what their emotions are saying. So those are the things that you can start to look for and search for if you think something's happening. So Facebook allows us to use CrowdTangle to monitor, and I believe I've shown this in class before. we have a couple of different CrowdTangles set up. This one shows media outlets and what's being talked about. The overperforming post on media outlets. This is government agencies. So this is like public works, police. So what's rising to the top there? This is showing how people are responding to different media posts. And then on this one, for example, I have Reddit. This is kind of going to give away what I want to use as our example, but this one is much more of a kind of in the moment. This is an overperforming. This is the most recent. These are actually Twitter lists that are pulling from different things. But CrowdTangle lets you search for a lot of things too. There's ways to dig in deeper and search specifically on Facebook within public post and group post and pages. So there's ways to set up some searches for words and phrases. We've narrowed down some particular lists that we can work from that allows us to run some of these searches. So that's a useful tool when we're talking about how to do it, especially on Facebook. I want us to be more active on monitoring social and making sure that's part of our news gathering process. So the example that he is kind of building towards in this presentation is his pop-up newsroom and what he's building there. This is usually what our team is responsible for, that we can identify things early on and alert the general assignment editor or reporters too. Let's keep going. So when you're talking about different searches and places for discovery, then these are kind of the obvious places. YouTube, especially out of the country, is actually a huge one. When you go outside of the US, it's even larger as a social network. These four are the ones we typically think about. When we're talking about Twitter, or any of them really, but Twitter is the easiest place for searches. You can think about Boolean searches. So that is the way that we used to search. I'm going to skip down to search operators. When you think about when Google first came out, now it can kind of read your mind of how you want to search for something. But this is gets really narrow on your search operators, being very specific and allowing you to search for more stuff. So you can see how something sent to a particular handle or from a particular user using a hashtag containing beer but not root. If you look, it's the minus root there. So if you're looking for something that's very common and you want to subtract or you want to exclude something that's very common to get something more specific. Near, we're going to talk more about geocoding and how we can find Columbia tweets. They're a little trickier than New York City. Narrowing by the keyword and then also the date that it was sent. So this is even more granular, that it can figure out the emoji and what kind of attitude they're sending it with. So those are all operators that you can use. One recommendation that Fergus had was actually using the shortened URL for the different social media outlets. So if you think about how on Twitter, when someone posts a YouTube link, it has this shortened version in it. So that .be, so then you can narrow to videos from YouTube that have earthquake in them. It might get you more specifically what you're looking for. We're going to talk more about TweetDeck. There's tools that allow us to actually send specific terms to Slack. So let's go ahead and look at TweetDeck while we're talking about that. So I told you that Columbia doesn't have its own. So if you're in advanced search, search. So near this place, so if you add location, one, I have satellite internet, so it never knows where I'm from. But if I looked for Columbia, Missouri, it is not going to come up in this list. Why Columbia, Tennessee comes up and Columbia, Missouri doesn't. But so the most granular you can get here is actually just Missouri and USA. So the way that I work around that is to build a geocode search. So I'm going to show you what this looks like over here. This is what the code looks like. So I'm going to show you where you get the geocode specifically. But you have to have the all of the punctuation exactly this way, no spaces, the comma, the negative, or however the longitudes and latitudes working, and then the comma, and this is the radius around that geolocation. So if I was looking for Mizzou and I clicked on University of Missouri, and if I could do, depending on what you're doing, you can do what's here, and you'll see this nice little box pops up. And so this is what I copy. Okay, so these are the coordinates that I'm specifically looking for. So this could be anything. So if we knew something was happening, for example, around, we knew that Mexico was where there was a pipeline explosion, we could go up to Mexico and get the, and I keep moving to find, I'm too far out. But we could get to Mexico, get those specific coordinates and put those in our search too and find people talking about the pipeline explosion. So you can narrow and change out those coordinates however it makes sense. But you want to make sure that you keep the, so if I did this and said what's here, and it would give me those coordinates. So I could switch those out and put those in my search. So in TweetDeck, I basically create a new column with this search, and I basically have this column up all the time. And what you can do is before the geocode, you can put the keyword you want to search for. So the limitations of this is that it is going to have only people that geotag their tweets are going to show up here. And a lot of people don't for safety reasons or security. They don't allow location on their tweets. And so that does narrow it for sure, but it can give you some idea of what's happening and what people are talking about. So the example I'm going to use today is the boom. So here's kind of the conversation happening of people in Columbia about this boom that happened today, Monday. And so you can kind of see, and so I was really able to follow a lot of what was being discussed and find out where people were looking and what people were talking about. You could also kind of see the way the conversation changed. If you look up explosion, so this is talking about the Mexico one, still Mexico, but you can see this person asked us about that. What was that explosion that just rocked my house? What's the word on explosion on Fenimore Drive? Unable to find any explosion. What caused the explosion? So they're like, the terms kind of changed as the day developed, but there was definitely questions going on about explosion, what was happening. So kind of going between those things, you could see where people were talking about it. You could kind of start to narrow in here to that. So that's where we've also found, like, the day they called off school, or Mizzou called off canceled classes at 7:55 a.m. We could search like class or canceled or whatever and start to see people talking about this. And then we ended up putting together a whole story based on tweets and conversations that were happening. So those are all kind of powerful ways to really narrow searches, see what's being discussed, maybe direct a reporter. Maybe we aren't taking this stuff specifically, but we can follow the conversation, share this with reporters that are going to the scene, get an idea of what's happening in the community. TweetDeck in general is a very powerful tool in terms of organizing Twitter for you and being able to search. I keep a Moledge list going. I have one over here of at Mizzou. This is people talking about Mizzou specifically. I have different users and notifications. Over the weekend, I had a true false one just to see what was being discussed about hashtag true false. That's another thing that we could use Twitter searching for is the protest that was happening around the Commons film that was shown on Sunday night and the conversation that happened there. So anyway, that's what this was about the Commons. So there's some things that we can do to know, instead of searching boom in general or protest in general, that gives you a lot of content. But if you can narrow it in specifically to our geography, then it's way more powerful and you know what's actually being talked about in your community. Snapchat. So there is a map that you can see on Snapchat that shows like hotspots. And so that's another clue if you're doing some digital news gathering, some social listening, and you were looking at this and you saw a hotspot pop up, then you could be like, whoa, what's happening? And might get a clue of something that happened. So here's a wreck that happened. Like something fell there. But at the same time, you see all this like highlighted in Hyde Park in London. And when you narrow in to see what people are doing there, then there's a squirrel eating nuts off someone's legs. So it's not necessarily like always the most newsworthy stuff that is creating a hotspot. So that's the limitation of Snapchat. This is not something that we're regularly paying attention to, but it is out there. On Facebook, there used to be a tool where you could see where Facebook Lives were taking place. The idea being that if you checked this, then you might be able to see hotspots of like a lot of people are going live in one place. There must be something happening there. As far as I know, they are phasing this out or have phased this out, so it's no longer available. But that was a good tool for kind of seeing what is happening. We're going to come back to this one, kind of with verification, I believe. So we've talked about, so there's the Facebook Live map. There's also CrowdTangle that has a lot of tools. This was another place though. Reddit can be incorporated. Reddit's another listening tool for sure. I don't necessarily have time to spend a lot of time digging through subreddits, but this is kind of how I keep track of what's being talked about on Reddit and what's popular there. Also when people are talking about our stories. So this is specifically searching for ColumbiaMissourian.com and identifying when people are talking about our stories. So you see this same day, the boom with the building shaking. So that was being talked about in Reddit. And from there, when I looked at this, like reading the comments, you could see how far and wide it was spread. So CrowdTangle's like another Facebook tool. We looked at ways to search in there. We're going to come back to this one. So once you have discovered this, then you obviously need to discuss it with someone, or if you identify something breaking, something happening, having that conversation, passing it off. We don't have the best protocol in place for this type of scenario, but we're working towards that. I think that's one of Ruby's goals. But once you have it, you know what, now that I am doing this, I'm going to go back. I apologize for all the mistakes, but I'm just trying to do this all in one take. So I'm going to go back and go ahead and walk through this IntelliTechnique search tool. So it has the Facebook profile search. So this can really help you connect people and connect people to groups. So when I first practiced using this, then it was right after George Smith won the Nobel Prize. So the way that you get this is you need their user number, okay, or their username find their user number. And once that plugs in, you'll see what happens. But so if I went to George Smith and I find the right one, that's a tricky thing with his name. But George Smith, this is our George Smith. This is his ID number. So some people, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that while I'm there. But if you look, then this is my ID number, or this is my Facebook. I have a username, and this is what I put in my URL so that it's easy to identify. George Smith has not done that, so I have his number already. So I can just plug that in and say go, and that will populate all of them. And then it has changed the way that you can run the search. But so then I can see the pages liked. So if I go here, Lucky's Market, and then this was actually led me down a road when I was searching for this, that he is involved in a pro-Palestine movement in Colombia. And so there was actually a conversation that followed this that brought the conversation around how do we include this, where is it relevant. This led me on a deeper search of him to find this, and I actually found articles in our archives about a pro-Palestine class that he taught and some controversy over that. So there was a whole, like, it unspun a whole web that I don't know that we would have immediately put together. Eventually, probably, but in that moment of like, oh, he's won a Nobel Prize, that is not necessarily something that I was searching for or looking for necessarily. So, but then you can start to just go through and it will pull in all this stuff. And obviously he is not a super active Facebook user. I'm sure if you went to mine, you'd get a lot more, but you can test your friends or other people you want to stalk, ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, and see what's going on there. So it's only going to show you what's like public, but it connects the dots way simpler than if you're trying to just dig through their entire Facebook page. So when you are either looking for more content about something or someone from Facebook, this can be a powerful tool. Also, when you're working on verification, which is going to be the next video, that will allow you to check some things as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and we'll do verification in the next.